They were an unlikely pair, a charming but dangerous drifter and a quiet, reserved young woman. Together, they would leave a trail of terror across the Midwest, forever etching their names into the dark annals of American crime. Alton Coleman was born in Waukegan, Illinois in 1955. From an early age, his life was marked by violence and instability. A childhood riddled with abuse and neglect shaped him into a man with a disturbing propensity for manipulation and cruelty. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already gained a reputation as a sexual predator, his charm masking the menace beneath. Debra Brown was different. Born in the same town 7 years after Coleman, she grew up under the weight of an abusive, controlling family. Diagnosed with an intellectual disability, Brown had no criminal record and was known as a quiet, obedient young woman. But when she met Alton Coleman in 1983, her life would take a sinister turn she could never undo. They met by chance. Brown, in her early 20s, fell under Coleman's spell almost immediately. To those around them, it was clear that Coleman had taken control of her, manipulating her, molding her. What no one could have predicted was how far she would go to prove her loyalty to him. In the summer of 1984, Alton Coleman and Debra Brown began a 2-month killing spree that would span 6 states: Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Kentucky, and Michigan. Their victims were young and old, black and white, strangers and acquaintances. The only constants were the brutality of their crimes and the senselessness of their violence. Their spree began with 7-year-old Vernita Wheat, whom Coleman lured away from her home in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Vernita's body was later found in an abandoned building, strangled with a ligature. It was the beginning of a horrific pattern that would claim the lives of 8 people and leave countless others scarred for life. 9-year-old Tunny Story in Indiana, 7-year-old Tamika Turks in Ohio. These were just 2 of their young victims. Coleman and Brown's crimes were marked by a disturbing willingness to target society's most vulnerable: children, the elderly, and even those who had trusted them. For them, no one was off limits. Authorities were desperate to stop the carnage. As Coleman and Brown moved from state to state, stealing cars, clothes, and lives, their faces appeared on wanted posters across the country. They were named to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, a distinction rarely given to women. But their trail of terror was far from over. In Ohio, the pair targeted Harry and Marlene Walters after asking to buy a camper from them. What began as a friendly conversation ended in bloodshed. Harry survived a brutal beating, but Marlene wasn't as fortunate. She was bludgeoned to death with a wooden object. By July 1984, their spree had claimed the lives of 8 people, with many more left injured, assaulted, and traumatized. The randomness of their violence left communities in constant fear. No one knew where they would strike next. Their reign of terror came to an end on July 20th, 1984, in Evanston, Illinois. Recognized by a tipster who had seen their faces on the news, Coleman and Brown were arrested after a brief struggle. The nation breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the horror they left behind was far from over. Alton Coleman faced trials in multiple states, receiving death sentences in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. He was executed by lethal injection in 2002. Debra Brown, whose defense argued she was a victim of Coleman's manipulation, was sentenced to death in Ohio. However, her sentence was later commuted to life in prison without parole.
To relish the attention he receives. During a recess today, while seated at the defense table, Coleman smiled and joked with a couple of young women who were sitting in the back of the courtroom watching the proceedings.
You don't have a heart at all. You don't.
8 lives lost, countless others forever changed. Alton Coleman and Debra Brown's killing spree remains one of the most senseless and brutal in American history, a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity.
We, the jury, recommend that the sentence of death be imposed on the defendant, Alton Coleman.
2 souls bound by violence and destruction. Was Debra Brown a willing participant or a manipulated pawn? The truth may never be fully known, but one thing is certain. Their names will forever be remembered, not for who they were, but for what they did.